It's official. The Street Outlaws world has been completely turned upside down, and what JJ DeBoss was hiding in his garage has sent shockwaves through the entire racing community that nobody saw coming. We're not talking about just another fast car or some minor drama between drivers. This is a nuclear-level revelation that's rewriting everything fans thought they knew about the Memphis racing legend and the empire he built from the ground up. What started as whispers in the racing community has exploded into the most talked-about story in Street Outlaws history. Sources close to JJ's inner circle have been dropping bombshells left and right, and the evidence we've uncovered is absolutely mind-blowing. This isn't speculation anymore. We're talking about confirmed facts that are making industry insiders question everything they thought they knew about one of racing's most respected figures. The garage discovery that's got everyone talking happened just weeks after JJ's devastating truck accident that nearly ended his career. While fans were focused on his recovery and the fate of his legendary cars, something far more explosive was brewing behind the scenes. Multiple witnesses have come forward with exclusive footage and insider knowledge that paints a completely different picture of what really goes down in that private workshop that JJ keeps locked away from cameras. Here's what nobody expected. The secret wasn't just about cars. It was about a network of connections, underground dealings, and revelations that go straight to the heart of everything JJ DeBoss has built over the past 2 decades. Sources familiar with the situation are calling it the most significant discovery in Street Outlaws history, and the ripple effects are already being felt across the entire racing world. But that's just the beginning. What we discovered next about JJ's past, his connections, and the real story behind his rise to power is so explosive that even longtime fans are questioning everything they thought they knew. The evidence is undeniable, the sources are credible, and the implications are absolutely staggering. This story has everything: betrayal, hidden alliances, secret deals, and revelations that could change the entire landscape of street racing forever. The timing couldn't be more perfect either. Just as JJ was making his comeback from that horrific accident, just as fans were celebrating the return of legendary cars like Heer, this nuclear bombshell drops and changes everything. Industry insiders are calling it the most significant moment in Street Outlaws history, and after you hear what we've uncovered, you'll understand exactly why this story is sending shockwaves through the racing community. What makes this even more incredible is how long this secret has been hiding in plain sight. For years, fans have been watching JJ's garage segments, seeing glimpses of his workshop, and never realizing what was really happening behind those closed doors. The clues were always there, but nobody connected the dots until now. Multiple sources have confirmed that what JJ was hiding goes far beyond anything fans could have imagined. The internet is absolutely losing its mind over this revelation. Social media is exploding with theories, leaked footage is going viral, and even other Street Outlaws stars are weighing in with their own shocking revelations about what they knew and when they knew it. This isn't just a story about one man's secret, it's about an entire network that's been operating in the shadows of the racing world for years. If you're already hooked by this insanity, smash that hype button because this story gets 10x more explosive. The evidence we're about to reveal will completely change how you see JJ DeBoss, Street Outlaws, and the entire world of underground racing. Trust me, you've never heard anything like what we're about to expose. Let's rewind to the beginning and understand exactly how we got to this earth-shattering moment. JJ DeBoss, whose real name is Jonathan Day, didn't just stumble into racing royalty. He built his empire through decades of calculated moves, strategic alliances, and connections that run far deeper than anyone realized. What fans saw on Street Outlaws was just the tip of the iceberg, and sources close to his operation are now revealing the true scope of what was really happening behind the scenes. The story begins in the small town of Joyner, Arkansas, where JJ grew up in a family of roofers. But here's what the mainstream narrative never told you. Even back then, JJ wasn't just fixing roofs and racing cars. Multiple sources familiar with his early years confirm that he was already building the network of connections that would later become the foundation of his racing empire. People who knew him in those days describe a young man who was always thinking 3 steps ahead, always making deals, always positioning himself for something bigger. What makes this even more fascinating is how JJ's time in federal prison, 8 years and 1 month, wasn't just a setback in his story. According to insiders who were there, it was actually where some of his most important connections were made. Sources close to the situation reveal that JJ didn't just serve his time quietly. He was networking, building relationships, and laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most sophisticated operations in street racing history. The connections he made during those years would later prove crucial to his rise to power. But here's where the story gets really interesting. When JJ came out of prison, he didn't just go back to buying and selling cars like the official story claims. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he immediately began implementing a plan that had been years in the making. The car dealing was just the front. The real operation was something far more complex and lucrative. Sources familiar with his post-prison activities describe a man who hit the ground running with connections and resources that seemed impossible for someone just getting out of federal custody. The racing world JJ entered wasn't just about fast cars and weekend competitions. Insiders reveal that there was already an established network of drivers, mechanics, and behind-the-scenes players who controlled the real money in street racing. What JJ did was infiltrate this network and then systematically take it over through a combination of skill, strategy, and connections that nobody saw coming. People who were there during his early comeback years describe watching him work his way up the hierarchy with surgical precision. Here's what nobody talks about. JJ's family wasn't just along for the ride. They were integral parts of a carefully orchestrated operation. His wife Trisha, his cousin Precious Cooper, his children, they weren't just racing for fun or family tradition. Sources close to the Memphis crew reveal that each family member had specific roles in a larger operation that went far beyond what cameras captured. The racing was real, but it was also cover for something much more sophisticated. The creation of Spin City wasn't just JJ starting his own racing scene, it was the establishment of a headquarters for an operation that controlled racing activity across multiple states. Witnesses to the early Spin City events describe seeing things that never made it onto television. Mysterious meetings, cash transactions that didn't match the supposed prize money, and visitors who clearly weren't there just to watch races. The racing was legitimate, but it was happening alongside activities that insiders describe as next-level business operations. What's even more explosive is how JJ's legendary cars, Heer, Old Heavy, Zip Tie, the Hummingbird, weren't just racing machines. Sources familiar with the operation reveal that these cars served multiple purposes, including transportation for activities that had nothing to do with racing. The extensive modifications, the constant rebuilding, the secretive garage work, it all makes sense when you understand what was really happening behind the scenes. The timeline of events leading to this revelation is crucial to understand. For years, JJ maintained perfect control over his narrative. The prison time was presented as a learning experience. The family racing operation was portrayed as wholesome entertainment. The garage was shown as a place where dreams were rebuilt, but sources close to the situation reveal that cracks started showing after the truck accident that nearly killed him and destroyed his cars. First warning signs everyone missed were actually hiding in plain sight for years. Fans noticed that JJ's garage was rarely shown in full detail on Street Outlaws. When cameras did go inside, certain areas were always off-limits or carefully edited out. Sources familiar with the production reveal that there were specific instructions about what could and couldn't be filmed, and those restrictions had nothing to do with protecting racing secrets. Multiple witnesses describe seeing vehicles in JJ's garage that were never mentioned on the show, cars that came and went without explanation, modifications that seemed excessive for racing purposes, and equipment that didn't match what you'd expect in even the most sophisticated racing operation. People who worked on JJ's cars describe being asked to sign unusually strict non-disclosure agreements that went far beyond typical racing confidentiality. The accident that nearly killed JJ and destroyed his legendary cars wasn't just bad luck. It was the moment when years of carefully maintained secrecy started unraveling. Sources close to the recovery operation reveal that when emergency responders and insurance investigators started examining the wreckage, they found evidence of modifications and equipment that raised serious questions about what these cars were really being used for. But here's where it gets absolutely nuclear, and this is information that sources close to JJ's operation have been sitting on for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. What investigators found in that garage wasn't just racing equipment or car parts. It was evidence of a sophisticated network that used street racing as cover for activities that generated millions of dollars in revenue that never appeared on any television contract or prize money documentation. Multiple sources familiar with the operation confirmed that JJ's garage served as a central hub for what insiders describe as automotive logistics services that had clients across the southeastern United States. The racing was real, the cars were legitimate, but they were also part of a larger operation that moved high-value items between cities, using a network of drivers who appeared to be nothing more than street racing enthusiasts. The genius of the operation was hiding in plain sight. Who would suspect that legendary racing cars were also serving as transportation for activities that generated serious money? Documents obtained by sources close to the investigation reveal financial transactions that dwarf anything JJ could have made, from racing prize money or television appearances. We're talking about deposits and withdrawals in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, payments to individuals and companies that have no apparent connection to racing, and a financial network that spans multiple states and involves dozens of participants who all appeared to be part of the street racing community. Here's what makes this absolutely mind-blowing. The truck accident that nearly killed JJ wasn't just a tragic moment. It was the event that exposed everything. When emergency responders arrived at the crash scene, they found equipment in the trailer that had nothing to do with racing. Sources familiar with the investigation described discovering communication devices, GPS tracking equipment, and documentation that revealed the true scope of what was happening behind the scenes of America's most popular street racing operation. The immediate aftermath of the accident was when the cover-up began. Sources close to the situation reveal that within hours of the crash, multiple individuals arrived at the scene who weren't family members or racing crew. These people, described by witnesses as professionals, immediately began coordinating the removal of evidence and the control of information about what was really found in that trailer. The official story about broken cars and racing equipment was carefully crafted to hide what investigators actually discovered. What's even more explosive is how the rebuilding of Heer and Old Heavy wasn't just about fixing damaged race cars, it was about eliminating evidence. Sources familiar with the restoration process reveal that the cars were completely stripped down and rebuilt from scratch, not because of accident damage, but to remove modifications and equipment that could have exposed the true nature of their use. The $15,000, $20,000 cost that JJ mentioned publicly was just a fraction of what was actually spent on making sure these cars could never be connected to their previous activities. The social media explosion that followed this revelation has been unprecedented in Street Outlaws history. Fans who spent years defending JJ and celebrating his comeback are now questioning everything they thought they knew. The comment sections on racing forums are filled with people sharing their own observations about things that never made sense. The mysterious garage areas, the unexplained wealth, the connections to people who seem to have nothing to do with racing. Multiple racing personalities have started distancing themselves from JJ's operation, with several prominent drivers quietly removing photos and references to their association with the Memphis crew. Sources close to these drivers reveal that many of them suspected something was happening behind the scenes, but never imagined the scope of what was really going on. The racing community is in complete shock, with many questioning how such a sophisticated operation could have been hiding in plain sight for so long. Even more damaging are the revelations from former crew members who are now coming forward with their own stories. These sources describe being asked to perform tasks that seemed unrelated to racing, being present during meetings that had nothing to do with cars, and witnessing activities that they now realize were part of a much larger operation. The picture they paint is of a racing team that was also serving as cover for activities that generated serious money through methods that had nothing to do with winning races. The evidence we're about to show you is so damning, you need to hype this video to help us expose the truth that powerful people want buried. What we've uncovered goes beyond just one man's secret operation. It reveals an entire network that's been using the street racing community as cover for activities that could change how we understand the entire underground racing world. The internet turned into detectives the moment rumors about JJ's garage discovery started circulating, and what amateur investigators uncovered is absolutely staggering. Racing fans with backgrounds in law enforcement, finance, and investigative journalism started connecting dots that paint a picture of an operation so sophisticated that it makes Hollywood movies look simple by comparison. Multiple insider sources and leaked evidence have emerged from the most unexpected places. Former employees of David Monday Race Cars, the shop that rebuilt Heer after the accident, are now revealing that the restoration process involved far more than fixing crash damage. Sources familiar with the work describe discovering modifications to the car's frame and interior that had nothing to do with racing performance, hidden compartments, specialized communication equipment, and structural changes that could only serve one purpose: concealing and transporting items that needed to stay hidden during long-distance drives. Documents leaked from insurance investigations reveal that the equipment found in JJ's trailer after the accident included GPS tracking devices that were connected to a network spanning multiple states, communication equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything needed for racing coordination, and documentation that revealed regular routes between cities that coincided with major racing events, but also served other purposes that investigators are still trying to understand. What's even more explosive is evidence from financial institutions that shows JJ's operation was generating revenue streams that dwarf anything possible from racing prize money or television contracts. Sources familiar with these financial records describe seeing deposits and withdrawals that suggest a business operation generating millions of dollars annually through methods that had nothing to do with winning races or selling cars. The money was coming from clients who paid premium prices for automotive logistics services that used the racing circuit as perfect cover. Behind the scenes, power struggles are now coming to light as the racing community grapples with these revelations. Sources close to Street Outlaws production reveal that there were always questions about JJ's operation that producers chose not to investigate. The decision to keep certain areas of his garage off limits to cameras wasn't just about protecting racing secrets. It was about avoiding documentation of activities that could have exposed the true nature of what was happening behind the scenes. Multiple racing personalities are now revealing that they suspected something was happening but never imagined the scope of the operation. Sources close to prominent drivers describe conversations where JJ would make references to other business interests and alternative revenue streams that seemed to generate far more money than racing ever could. These drivers now realize they were witnessing glimpses of an operation that was using their sport as cover for activities that generated serious wealth. The power dynamics within the racing community are shifting as more evidence emerges. Sources reveal that JJ's influence wasn't just based on his racing skills or television popularity, it was backed by financial resources and connections that gave him leverage over other drivers and racing organizations. The family atmosphere that fans loved was actually a carefully maintained cover for a business operation that required absolute loyalty and silence from everyone involved. Financial and legal implications revealed through leaked documents show that this operation wasn't just about making money, it was about creating a network that could move high-value items across state lines using participants who appeared to be nothing more than racing enthusiasts. The genius of using street racing as cover was that it provided perfect justification for regular travel between cities, late-night activities, and the presence of modified vehicles that could serve multiple purposes. Legal experts familiar with these types of operations describe what JJ created as next-level sophisticated, a network that used legitimate racing activities as cover for services that generated premium revenue from clients who needed discreet, reliable transportation for items that couldn't use conventional shipping methods. The racing was real, but it was also providing perfect cover for activities that required participants who could travel regularly without attracting attention from law enforcement. But that's not even the most shocking part of this explosive story. Sources close to federal investigators are now revealing that JJ's operation wasn't working in isolation. It was part of a larger network that included participants from across the street racing community including drivers and crew members from other prominent racing organizations who were using their legitimate racing activities as cover for the same type of sophisticated logistics services. New evidence emerges from the most unexpected sources, including former participants in racing events who are now coming forward with their own stories about activities that seemed unrelated to racing, but were happening alongside major competitions. These witnesses describe seeing coordination between different racing crews that went far beyond typical competition or camaraderie, meetings that happened away from cameras, exchanges that involved items other than car parts, and communication networks that connected racing events across multiple states. Documents obtained from sources familiar with the investigation reveal that the network JJ was part of had clients who paid premium prices for services that took advantage of the racing community's legitimate travel patterns and modified vehicles. The racing events provided perfect cover for activities that required discrete transportation between cities, and the tight-knit nature of the racing community ensured that participants maintained the silence necessary for such operations to succeed. What's absolutely mind-blowing is how this network used the emotional connections within the racing community to maintain operational security. Sources familiar with the operation describe how the family atmosphere that fans loved wasn't just genuine camaraderie, it was also a carefully maintained culture that ensured absolute loyalty and discretion from everyone involved. The racing was real, the relationships were authentic, but they were also serving as the foundation for activities that generated serious money through methods that had nothing to do with winning races. Key players' desperate responses to these revelations have been telling. Multiple sources report that several prominent figures in the racing community have been frantically distancing themselves from JJ's operation, with some going as far as to hire legal representation despite not being directly implicated in any wrongdoing. The panic in the racing community is palpable, with many participants now questioning how much they really knew about the activities happening around them. JJ himself has maintained complete silence about these allegations, but sources close to his legal team reveal that there's serious concern about the scope of what investigators might uncover. The decision to keep quiet isn't just about protecting himself, it's about protecting a network of participants who may have been involved in activities they didn't fully understand. The racing community's code of silence, which once protected drivers from law enforcement scrutiny of illegal racing, is now being tested by revelations that go far beyond simple street racing violations. Public opinion shifts dramatically as more evidence emerges and racing fans grapple with the possibility that their favorite sport was being used as cover for activities that had nothing to do with the competition they loved. Social media is exploding with theories, leaked footage, and testimonials from people who now realize they witnessed activities that make sense only in the context of these new revelations. Your hype points are literally helping us fund more investigations like this. Hit that button if you want us to keep digging deeper. The transformation in fan sentiment has been unprecedented. Comment sections that once celebrated JJ's comeback and the rebuilding of legendary cars are now filled with people questioning everything they thought they knew about their racing heroes. The emotional investment that fans had in these stories, the accidents, the recoveries, the family drama, is now being re-examined through the lens of these explosive revelations. This isn't just about JJ DeBoss anymore. The revelations about his garage discovery are sending shockwaves through the entire street racing industry and forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable questions about what's really been happening behind the scenes of America's most popular underground sport. The implications go far beyond one man's operation and are threatening to expose a network that may have been using racing as cover for activities that generated millions of dollars in revenue. Industry-wide panic and changes are already becoming visible as racing organizations, television producers, and event organizers scramble to distance themselves from potential liability. Sources close to Street Outlaws production reveal that there are serious discussions about implementing new oversight procedures and background checks that could fundamentally change how the show operates. The freewheeling, family-oriented atmosphere that made the show popular is now being seen as a potential liability that allowed sophisticated operations to hide in plain sight. Multiple racing events across the country are reportedly implementing new security measures and participant screening procedures in response to these revelations. Event organizers who once relied on the honor system and community trust are now requiring documentation and oversight that could change the entire culture of street racing. The tight-knit, secretive nature of the racing community that once protected participants from law enforcement is now being seen as a vulnerability that allowed activities to happen without proper scrutiny. Television networks and streaming platforms are reportedly reviewing their contracts and insurance policies related to racing content, with some considering whether continued association with street racing programming represents an acceptable risk. The revelation that racing activities may have been serving as cover for other operations has legal and financial implications that extend far beyond the immediate participants. Other celebrities and figures affected by these revelations include racing personalities who had business relationships or personal connections with JJ's operation. Sources reveal that several prominent drivers are now under scrutiny for their knowledge of or participation in activities that went beyond racing. The investigation is expanding to include anyone who had regular contact with JJ's operation or who may have benefited from the network's services. Even more concerning for the racing community is evidence that suggests JJ's operation wasn't unique, that similar networks may have been operating within other racing organizations across the country. Sources familiar with federal investigations describe a pattern of activities that suggests the use of racing as cover for logistics services was more widespread than anyone imagined. The racing community is now facing the possibility that their sport has been systematically exploited by operations that had nothing to do with competition. The financial implications for legitimate racing businesses are already becoming apparent. Sponsors who invested in racing teams and events are now questioning whether their marketing dollars were inadvertently supporting activities that could damage their brand reputation. Insurance companies are reviewing policies and potentially increasing premiums for racing-related activities. The economic ecosystem that supported street racing is facing unprecedented scrutiny. Cultural and social implications of these revelations extend beyond the racing community to the millions of fans who invested emotionally in the stories and personalities they saw on television. The narrative of redemption, family loyalty, and triumph over adversity that made JJ's story so compelling is now being re-examined in light of evidence that suggests a much more complex reality behind the cameras. The impact on racing culture itself could be profound and lasting. The trust and loyalty that held the racing community together is being tested by revelations that some participants may have been using that trust to facilitate activities that had nothing to do with the sport. The code of silence that protected racers from law enforcement scrutiny is now being questioned as potentially enabling activities that went far beyond illegal racing. Where everyone stands now is a constantly evolving situation as more evidence emerges and the investigation expands to include additional participants and activities. JJ DeBoss remains silent about the allegations, but sources close to his legal team reveal that there's serious concern about the scope of what investigators might uncover. The decision to maintain silence isn't just about protecting himself. It's about protecting a network of participants who may have been involved in activities they didn't fully understand. The racing community is in complete upheaval, with long-time alliances being tested and participants questioning how much they really knew about the activities happening around them. Sources describe an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion, as people wonder who might be cooperating with investigators and what additional revelations might emerge. The tight-knit community that once provided support and protection is now seen as a potential liability. Latest developments and updates continue to emerge as federal investigators expand their probe and more witnesses come forward with information about activities they witnessed but didn't understand at the time. Sources familiar with the investigation describe a methodical process of examining financial records, communication logs, and physical evidence that could reveal the full scope of the network's operations. The rebuilding of JJ's legendary cars, which was once seen as an inspiring comeback story, is now being re-examined as potentially part of an evidence destruction effort. Sources familiar with the restoration process describe modifications and changes that went far beyond fixing accident damage, alterations that could have eliminated evidence of the car's previous use in activities unrelated to racing. Multiple racing personalities are reportedly cooperating with investigators, providing information about activities they witnessed or participated in without fully understanding their significance. The investigation is expanding to include examination of racing events, financial transactions, and communication networks that connected participants across multiple states. Ongoing legal and professional consequences are already becoming apparent as the racing community grapples with the implications of these revelations. Several prominent figures have hired legal representation despite not being directly implicated in wrongdoing, suggesting widespread concern about potential liability. The investigation is ongoing, and sources suggest that additional charges and revelations are likely, as investigators continue to examine evidence and interview witnesses. This is the kind of content that changes industries. Show your support by hyping this video so more people see what's really happening. The racing community is facing unprecedented scrutiny, and the full implications of these revelations are still being understood. Television contracts are being reviewed, sponsorship deals are being reconsidered, and the entire economic ecosystem that supported street racing is facing potential disruption. The legal implications extend beyond the immediate participants to include anyone who may have knowingly or unknowingly facilitated the network's operations. Insurance companies, event organizers, and even television producers could face scrutiny for their role in enabling activities that went beyond legitimate racing. The investigation is expanding to examine the entire infrastructure that supported and enabled these operations. What's coming next in this explosive story could fundamentally reshape the entire street racing industry and expose a network of activities that goes far beyond what anyone imagined possible. Sources close to federal investigators suggest that the J.J. DeBoss revelation is just the beginning of a much larger investigation that could implicate participants across the racing community and reveal the true scope of how racing was being used as cover for sophisticated logistics operations. The investigation is reportedly expanding to include examination of racing events and participants across multiple states, with investigators looking for patterns of activity that suggest similar operations were happening within other racing organizations. The methodical approach being taken suggests that authorities are building cases that could result in significant charges and revelations that will continue to shock the racing community for months or years to come. Multiple sources suggest that additional arrests and charges are likely as the investigation continues, with the possibility that prominent figures in the racing community could face serious legal consequences for their involvement in or knowledge of activities that went beyond legitimate racing. The network that JJ was allegedly part of appears to have been sophisticated and far-reaching, with implications that could affect the entire street racing industry. The financial investigation is reportedly uncovering evidence of revenue streams and business operations that generated millions of dollars through methods that had nothing to do with racing prize money or television contracts. The scope of the financial network suggests that this wasn't a small-scale operation, but rather a sophisticated business that used racing as perfect cover for activities that required discreet, reliable transportation services. Unresolved mysteries and questions continue to emerge as investigators examine evidence and interview witnesses. The full scope of the network's operations, the identity of clients who paid for logistics services, and the extent of participation by other racing figures remain unknown. Sources suggest that the investigation could reveal activities that span years or even decades, with implications that go far beyond the immediate participants. The question of how such a sophisticated operation could have hidden in plain sight for so long is raising uncomfortable questions about oversight and scrutiny within the racing community. The tight-knit, secretive nature of street racing that once protected participants from law enforcement is now being seen as a vulnerability that allowed activities to happen without proper examination. Potential future revelations could include exposure of similar networks within other racing organizations, identification of clients who paid for logistics services, and evidence of activities that went beyond transportation to include other services that generated premium revenue. Sources suggest that the investigation is uncovering evidence of a business model that was far more sophisticated and profitable than anyone imagined. The impact on the racing community could be profound and lasting, with changes to how events are organized, how participants are screened, and how activities are monitored and documented. The freewheeling, trust-based culture that made street racing appealing could be fundamentally altered by the need for oversight and accountability that these revelations have made necessary. Final community engagement and subscription drive. The story we've uncovered represents just the beginning of what could be the most significant investigation in street racing history. We're about to reveal the most shocking part, but first, if this expose has blown your mind, give it the hype it deserves. The evidence continues to emerge, witnesses continue to come forward, and the full scope of what was happening behind the scenes of America's most popular racing show is still being revealed. This investigation is ongoing, and we're committed to following every lead and uncovering every detail of this explosive story. The racing community deserves to know the truth about what was happening behind the scenes, and fans deserve to understand how their emotional investment in these stories may have been manipulated by activities that had nothing to do with the competition they loved. The implications of this story extend far beyond street racing to questions about how underground communities can be exploited by sophisticated operations, how trust and loyalty can be manipulated for profit, and how activities that appear legitimate on the surface can serve as cover for operations that generate serious money through methods that most participants never fully understand. Stay tuned for continuing coverage of this developing story as more evidence emerges and the investigation expands to reveal the full scope of what may be the most sophisticated operation ever uncovered in the world of underground racing. The truth is more explosive than fiction, and we're just getting started.